To look, as we've gone through the government programs in a detailed fashion with the GAL and based on their report, we have 100 different programs with 100 sets of bureaucracies for surface transportation. Why do we have that? Because Congress has mismanaged. That's why. Because of expediency. Because of vanity, because of wanting to get reelected, we create another program and another program and another program. It looks good, sounds good, but nobody ever does the research to see where they overlap. Nobody ever requires that the metrics say, is this program effective? And nobody really looks at the Constitution to say, does it fit with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the enumerated powers that we are supposed to live within, which we blow by all the time doing things. The Judiciary Committee today passed a bill for state prisons called the Second Chance Act. When we passed it the first time, I finally let it go because it was supposed to be a demonstration and a limited program. It's now up. It's going to get reauthorized for 5 more years. It's legitimately has zero role for the federal government, and we're going to spend $600 million on it, which we don't have. We'll borrow. It's well intended, but it's not our role. It's the state's role. And we have hundreds of thousands of things just like that where we've ignored what the Constitution says so we can look good politically. We have teacher quality programs. Teacher quality programs. 82 different programs by the federal government to improve the quality of our teachers. You know, Thomas Jefferson was really the father of education in our country. He worked for years to establish the University of Virginia. He was committed to the fact that a great education will produce great benefits, not only for the individual with the education, but for their family and our country as a whole. Here's what he said. For the federal government to become involved in education would require a change to the U.S. Constitution, he happened to be one of the people who wrote it. And yet, what have we done since the beginning of the Department of Education? We've spent $2.6 trillion on education in this country at the federal level, and every parameter measuring a metric on the progression of our kids in schools is worse or the same after that $2.6 trillion. I can't tell you, it's not working. And the reason it's not working is you can be a teacher at home and if the federal government looks at you and you don't know what to do, but we can hire you to do the work in Washington, and all of a sudden you know what they need to do. So we have this massive bureaucracy that has ruined our education because we spend all our money filling out forms and requirements and meeting mandates of the federal education, and we've taken the power away of the control of education from the parents and the teachers, the very people who care most about the kids' success in education. $2.6 trillion with nothing to show for it other than for the politicians to feel good about themselves and to say we were doing something. We have 88 different economic development programs, $6 billion a year just in 4 of them. Economic development. On not one of those 88 programs is there a metric anywhere that says it is money well spent that gets a positive result for the country. There are anecdotal evidence that it worked here, but as a thing as a whole, no. So we don't know what we're doing. We're throwing money that we don't have on things that we don't know are working, and when we go to vote for them to eliminate them, the Senate votes against it because it might bother their political position. It might bother their next election. We don't do it. We don't address and do our job. I'll never forget in one of the committees as I was in last year, 2 separate times bills were brought up in the committee that were do identical things that we were already doing in the agencies. And the senator and their staff didn't know it. And had I not raised objections, we would have created more agencies. 80 programs for transportation assistance. 80? If it's our role, why do we need 80? And oh, by the way, has anybody measured to see if any of the 80 actually work? The answer is no. We have none that have a report on whether or not they're effective to the goals of what they were set out to do, because there's no oversight carried out by Congress. We were so busy earmarking for so many years, everybody forgot to check and see if, well, what we intended to do, is it working? And we're still not doing it. We have 56 different programs to teach the American people to become financially literate. 56? Us, the federal government, teaching financial literacy? When we can't balance our budget, we have multiple programs. We don't live within a confined budget. The first principle of financial literacy is living within your means. And yet we have this many programs, 56, to teach American citizens to be financially literate. Job training. Here's one of my best. This is great. We have 47 job training programs that cost $16 billion a year. All but 3 overlap one another. That's what the GAO says. And there's not a metric on one of them to see if they're working. And when you talk to the people that go through the program, half of them say it's a waste. It's a joke. Because I've actually talked to them. And yet we're spending that kind of money, in excess of $15 billion a year on job training programs. Now, there's no question we need job training programs, but we need job training programs that work. And why would we need 47? So when somebody tells you we can't balance our budget, you ought to blow a hole right through them with your thought that says you obviously don't know what's going on in the federal government. Homeless prevention assistance, 20 different federal programs. Now, we should be helping people who need our help. I'm not denying that. But how we help and the mechanisms of how we help ought to be frugal, efficient, and effective. You know, I've served in Congress. I'm in my 13th year. 6 years as a congressman, 4 years out of here to get a breath of fresh air, and now in my 7th year in the Senate. What I know is we don't know what we're doing. And it's obvious looking at our budget. It's also obvious looking at the dysfunction of the Senate and the leadership in the Senate that we don't want. We haven't had a budget in 2 years. The one thing any financial counselor will tell you is the first thing you got to know is where you are and set a plan. We've had no attempt to bring a budget to this body in well over 2.5 years. No attempt. What does that tell you? It goes back to vanity. It goes back to cowardice. It goes back to us not doing what we're intended to do because we care more about our position than we care about the country. We have 18 programs to feed the hungry. We have 17 disaster response and preparedness. Just in FEMA. 17 different programs, of which 11 overlap. Now, FEMA didn't set those up. The bureaucracy didn't create those. We did. Every one of these programs was created by a member of Congress. So you can't blame administrations, and you can't blame presidents. What you have to do is blame Congress. We have 130 overlapping programs in the Department of Agriculture, 18 overlapping programs at the Department of Congress, 230 overlapping programs at the Department of Education, 17 in the Department of Energy, 36 in the Department of Human Services, 32 in the Department of Homeland Security, 60 in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, 40 in the Department of Interior, 53 in the Department of Justice, 35 in the Department of Labor, 6 in the Department of State, and 180 government-wide, if you look at all economic development programs, 180. And we just listed the 88 that run through 4 of the agencies. Is it any wonder that we're going belly up? And the problem is us. The problem is we've got a solution now that's come to us from the House, and we're not going to let that solution go forward. Because politically, it's uncomfortable. Politically, we don't want to allow the people of this country to decide whether or not we ought to live within our means and put a bridle with a bit in our mouth that says, whoa, you're not going to continue to destroy the future of this country and the prospects for our children anymore. When I came to the Senate, I came after having read a book called Running on Empty. It was written by a man by the name of Pete Peterson. He was bipartisan in his criticism of both parties, and he was absolutely accurate. We're in trouble because parties matter more than the country, because control matters more than the country, that political careers matter more than our children or our grandchildren. So I go back and talk about what's possible. A lot of people will disagree what's in here. This $9 trillion, of which what the House of Senate would take about 60% of. But here's what I say to my colleagues who don't want to vote on a balanced budget amendment, don't want to vote on the cut, cap, and balance. Where's your plan? I've listed 625 pages of cuts, specific cuts, elimination of duplication, elimination of waste, elimination of fraud in this. 3,000 footnotes, looked at every program throughout the federal government, looked at every CRS report, looked at every OIG, Office of Inspector General, looked at every GAO report, looked at every OMB report, and looked at every other outside report that we could find. The fact is we could solve our problems tomorrow. America, we could solve them tomorrow with good old-fashioned common sense that the vast majority of Americans have and is sorely lacking. We don't have a fiscal crisis, we have a common sense crisis in this body and in the leadership in Congress. We lack common sense. We lack sound judgment. And we need the hard bit of a bridle put on us through a balanced budget amendment to control us. Because human nature is human nature. And whatever we do today, we'll be back to our bad habits tomorrow. Even if we pass cuts, even if we cap spending, if we don't have a balanced budget amendment that forces us to live within the constraints of our revenue, we will be back there again. And what does that mean? That means the future of America is suspect. It doesn't have to be. We don't have to go the way of every other republic. We don't have to fail over fiscal issues. We can cheat history. The American people are the greatest people in the world because they're a blend of all the people in the world. And they desire freedom and opportunity. And that's limited because we've limited it. We, through our profligate spending, our inattention to detail, our failure to do oversight, we have undercut the potential of our country. Let's restore it. Let's restore it. Let's restore it Saturday morning by moving on to this bill and allowing ourselves to have a debate, offer amendments, and really debate. Have what the Senate hadn't had in a year and a half, a real debate about the issues of our day and the reasons behind it. But what I would caution the American people is remember what Martin Luther King said as you hear that debate. Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Cowardice asks the question, is it expedient? But conscience and right and good ask, is it right? I tell you, it's not right to have multiple programs doing the same thing, wasting our kids' future. It's not right for the Congress not to oversight and eliminate programs. It's not right for us to spend money we don't have on things we don't absolutely need. It's not right for us to take the control out of the children's education from the parents and teachers who have their best interest at heart and place it in a bureaucracy that has no compassion whatsoever, even though it feigns that it does. It's not right. Maybe politically expedient, may be popular to some people, but it doesn't make it right. So as you look, here is how you get $9 trillion. And you can pick any part of that to meet this cut, cap, and balance. or you can come up with your own. But the fact is nobody wants to lay on the table what they think. I've already been roundly criticized in the press for certain aspects of this, people who disagree. That's fine. I'm planning on defending everything that I put in here. With the best of my knowledge and a great staff that spent thousands upon thousands of hours, we came up with a way to solve America's problems. And we can do it. America can be bright, can be growing, can be developing jobs if we get the government out of the way and limit the role of the federal government. I see my colleague from Delaware, one of my great friends, and you hear that said a lot here, but he is a great friend. It's not the conventional, just common greeting, and I believe I'm over my time. I will be back to the floor to finish this conversation. But America needs to know we don't have any problem we can't fix. What we lack is leaders who will fix it. That's our deficit. It's a deficit of courage. It's a deficit of will. And with that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Delaware.
Madam President, thank you very much for this time to speak. And before